like to introduce our last speaker of this morning, Dr. Yuen. Dr. Yuen is currently Associate Professor in Information and Technology Study and the Director of the Center for Information Technology in Education, Faculty of Education at University of Hong Kong. He has extensive experience in leading international and large-scale research projects and has led more than 40 projects funded by internal as well as external competitive research grants, such as University Grant Committees, Research Grant Council, Quality Education Fund, UNESCO, government agency, and business organization. His primary research interests focus on technology adoption and change in education, ICT in higher education, pedagogical innovation, social and cultural aspect of ICT use, digital divide in education and teacher education. He published widely in this area and has over 200 publications, including books, monograph, books, chapter, journal, article, and a conference paper. Wow. Dr. Yuen, you look so young. I think that you published over 10 papers 1 year. You are so wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Yuen.
So, good morning. It's still morning, so that we're looking forward to the afternoon lunch. Anyway, so I'm very grateful to have an opportunity to share a story with you. First of all, I would like to thank the NTNU in particular, Dr. Chow, the Dean, and also Dr. Chow and Dr. Chen for their invitation. Let me to share with you. Now, this is a story. I'm not a good storyteller, but why I just choose to use a storytelling approach. The story cannot give you a lot of details, but we will highlight something. Then let's look at that, and then if you have time, then we'll have more discussion on that. Now, in this presentation, at the end, I will give you a test. Be careful. Okay, be careful. Now, look at this slide first. Now, do you know the conference title is about the new generation learner, right? What is learning? So this is my first. I don't want to read it. Okay, I'll give you some hint. Remember that learning is fundamentally about change. Okay, I will give you a test, I promise. Anyway, remember that. Okay, let's start the story. Now, the story title is about e-learning and disruptive innovation in higher education. In particular, I would like to tell you a story. That is a case study of a university in Hong Kong. All right. So, of course, later on you know which university it is. Of course, I mean, Kevin already just said, yes, this is the University of Auckland. So this is his story. So my story is about a university in Hong Kong. So that is the University of Hong Kong. So usually they use HKU, Hong Kong U. Now, this is just some background. I don't want to read it, but then we established in 1911 a research-led comprehensive university with 10 faculties, 27,000 students from 65 nationalities. That's the most recent figure because the 2013 to 14 is still waiting for calculation anyway. So then we're waiting for that. Then undergraduate is about 56%. TPG is about top postgraduate. We call TPG. And research postgraduate, that's Master of Philosophy and Master of PhD and Philosophy, Doctor of Philosophy. We call altogether postgraduate, we're 44%. Local, 66%. There's a lot of discussion in Hong Kong. So asking, how many mainland China students will study in your university? I mean, at the University of Hong Kong, we have all together, including undergrad and postgrad, it's about 22%. Okay, so that's last year's figure. International students were 12%. That is a kind of, let me just show. This is, here is that the oldest, you cannot find this picture anyway. The building was built in about more than 100 years ago. That is it looks like. And then this is the recent campus. And later I will talk about a little bit about this is a new campus, how we redesigned the whole idea of a university. So that we will talk about that later. So this is about what we call the centenarial campus. When we celebrate 100 years birthday, then we start to build a new campus. So then you will ask the question, why? I will tell you why. It begins with change. Let's talk about system level first. Because when you talk about the change in a university, you cannot just talk about, hey, this is a change. From Kevin's presentation, they very much focus on ecosystem. So a university cannot be just say, stand alone, we change. No, you have to change because of the system. So then I would talk about some system level change first. All right? Of course, I don't want to mention about this is one system change or technology advancement. I think started many years ago, but of course, rapidly in the last decade or 20 years, started from 1990s. I don't want to mention one by one. In particular, that one is interesting. You remember the Time magazine. You are the, you remember that? Okay. So that is one thing. I would say this is a very critical point. Year 2006 is a very critical point. In particular about that is the how we can see the power of internet be recognized by Time magazine, an international magazine. When we talk about university, let's talk about school first. Because the NTNU is a normal university, because they provide teacher education. So that's why when we receiving students from schools, from primary and secondary, so that's why we'll talk about that. So this is the very first change. So the Hong Kong government, just like all over the world, we started our very first document, policy, in 1998. The second one, 2004, the third one, 2008. So then if you want to, I don't want to discuss it, because you can just have a look at my book, published in 2010. I, based on that, started from 1998, the first policy paper. I have an analysis of these three policy documents and how the whole Hong Kong situation changed within, from 98 to 2010, is about 12 years, right? So then you can take a look. If you really want that, send an email to me. You can get a free copy, e-copy, because that book is published by the government, okay? So I can send you the link for that book. Please send me an email if you really want to have a look of that book. It's 240 pages, then you can look at it. Recently, just last month, in this month, still May, right? The government just released a few weeks ago the fourth policy on ICT in education, 2014. So then this is creating another driving force to the higher education. Among all this document, I think this is the most important document. I have to talk about it at the system level change. It's a document published in year 2000 by the government called, it's a kind of providing an educational blueprint for the 21st century. This is about the whole world looking at 21st century. Now in this document, when we talk about new generation learner, because in year 2000, just like Hong Kong, in America, in the US, everywhere, they talk about 21st century education, right? I don't want to talk about UNESCO, policy or UNESCO paper, because this is a lot of discussion on that. So this is about this in Hong Kong. So we have to do something. We want to create a new culture, all right, at that time. That is started from year 2000. How to make it, okay? The first thing, the government have a very, I would say they were smart or not, because the government started with a kind of change it by structure and change it by financial control. All right? You know that in university, you know better than me, right? So if you want to change something, you have some kind of control on finance. That will be the easier. Then the government started with a change of the structure. How to change it? The government turned the whole Hong Kong education system to, this is the formula, 63223 to 6334. What does it mean? First, you know that. Now, I think Taiwan have, is it 4 years university, right? Now, Hong Kong, before this change, with 3 years. So then in Hong Kong, previously, I mean, before the change, we have 6 years for primary, 3 years for junior secondary, 2 for senior secondary, and 2 for what we call the matriculation. Just like, you know what, matriculation. So this is a British system. This is a British word anyway, so they call it matric. So that 3-year higher education. But now they change it to 6-3-3-4. 3-year junior and 3-year senior. And then go to university, so you will have 4 years. Okay? This is provide a very, very important driving force. The new senior secondary started in 2009. Okay? And then the new 4-year university program started from 2012. We just started that. Before that, the whole Hong Kong university, you can think about how messy they are. Because all of a sudden, they have to change hundreds of programs from 3 years into 4 years. Right? So that is the thing that I want to mention from the system level. Let's look up closer from the ecosystem at institutional level. Now, if you look at the situation in higher education, I think this is a very important document. You can go to the web, you can find this full document published by the working group of the UGC. UGC is the University Grants Committee. So that committee talk about using, I mean, that is one session I would just want to do, because this is more like how to frame the use of technology. Because you need a frame. You cannot just use it and use it. Because how to frame it, right? Just like a picture, you need a frame to look at a picture, right? So the framing of the use of technology in higher education, I think this is an important document. 1995, the framing is started with what we call the TDG, Teaching Development Grant. At that time, the government started to spend altogether, I think about 300 million Hong Kong. And then they started to plan to give resources to university to focus on teaching development. So this is started from 1995. And then I think the other thing is about what we call the Educational Development Unit, just like the CTLD. I mean, in Hong Kong, almost all universities will have similar, that kind of unit, almost. They started from, even some of them started from early 90s. Or even 80s. They have a big, but then they change a lot anyway. But at that time, they all changed it because they wanted a servicing department, just delivery type technology. But they put more concern on pedagogy, focus on teaching and learning. So that's why this is another thing, is that whole Hong Kong is a very technology-based culture, strong. If you look at the penetration of the internet, Hong Kong is #1 almost. The penetration of internet and using computer. The government, every year, we did studies. So that the web-based technologies for teaching and learning is important, almost, and link this to the quality of teaching and learning. So in this document, in particular, they try to say, yes, now of course, I mean, we can have some discussion. Whether using technology will lead to quality is another thing. But then at that time, this is one of the linkage. Back to Hong Kong U. That is about whole Hong Kong higher education. Hong Kong U, we started the very first program in 1998, what we call the IBM Notebook Program. You remember the IBM Notebook Program, the ThinkPad? That is 1998, not now, right? Now we don't have IBM, we have Lenovo, right? But at that time, the university already signed a contract with the IBM to enable all incoming students with a personal notebook. This is, I think, is a very clever move because now we talk about BYOD, but at that time, the University of Hong Kong already has some kind of BYOD. From the study, we find that the university saves a lot of money. We don't need to create computer laboratory. And then the administration found that we save a lot of money since 1998 because we don't need to pay, we need a computer lab for the students because every student, the first year student, they have their own notebook. We fund them, we subsidize them. Even then, the university still save a lot of money. Okay? Of course, I don't want to mention about because we did some study on that. From that, the whole idea, so technology is more or less like a given at the University of Hong Kong. So it's more like given. So that's why the focus will be looking at the teaching and learning quality. So this is what we call the whole idea is the teaching and learning lead the development of using technology at the University of Hong Kong. This is another important time. The university appointed a new Pro-Vice Chancellor in year 2007 because you remember we have to change all the curriculum to 4 years and then provide all these courses in 2012. So that's when the senior management of the university will appoint one particular Pro-Vice Chancellor to look after that. Now, before this, still we have that kind of portfolio about teaching and learning, but under some other, under the Deputy Vice Chancellor, and then I'll take it. But then, of course, this is not particular, focus on the teaching and learning. But now we change it. Because of time, I will just skip a little bit about that. When we started to talk about the e-learning, I would like to look at it as e-learning as a concept first. A group of European researchers, they tried to, this is a paper published in 2012, they tried to look at various definitions on e-learning and then try to group them. So what is a definition of e-learning? So then they have 4 groups classified under this. The first group they call technology-driven. The second group they call e-learning is more delivery system-oriented. The third one, communication-oriented. The fourth one, educational paradigm-oriented. Okay? So this here is, I don't want to read it. Now here's all this definition. For example, if you want to look at the paper, for example, here's some example of the definition of e-learning. 2 words, the group called technology-driven definition. All right, for example, they would say e-learning is a use of electronic media for a variety of learning purposes that range from add-on functions in conventional classroom, blah, 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 and that sort of thing. The second group, delivery system, very much focused on the real-time delivery of training, and then the end-user device, internet, that kind of. The third one, communication, because very much focused on using online communication to facilitate teaching and learning. The fourth one, look at paradigm, because this is more looking at focus on quality of learning by facilitating access to resources and remote exchange and collaboration. For example, people will talk about collaborative work, talk about project-based learning, talk about different kind of paradigm in teaching and learning. So this is the fourth group. Okay, back to the story, but that is more like a side dish. This is the main course. Now, after introduce the side dish, here's the main course about what happened in e-learning at Hong Kong U. E-learning is not normally confined to the use of technology in distance This is not the idea. This is a universal position. It is defined as a use of all types of technologies to enhance teaching and learning in conjunction with face-to-face learning. Now look at this. This is quite an interesting thing. You know, University of Hong Kong or Hong Kong U is a traditional university. We very much rely on face-to-face. But as we discussed this is from a document in year 2011. But still you see that this is what our core concern. So then in year 2011, we have a kind of e-learning strategy in the university. Now I want to brief you a little bit. Because at the University of Hong Kong, 10 faculty, or almost just like 10 colleges, they have their own tradition, they have their own resources. For example, Faculty of Medicine, they have huge resources. You know what I mean? You know that, right? Usually in university, the medicine, they got almost double or triple of the resource of other faculty. They can afford to do some other thing, to afford to build their own system. Other faculty, they build their own. I mean, Hong Kong is just like that. 10 faculty do their own thing, but that's in a repetitive way, you know what I mean? But the university in year 2011, no, this is not good enough. Let's look at that. And then we assign a task force to look at the situation. We study the whole thing, it's almost close to 1 year, and asking and eventually we make a decision to use only one system, e-learning system. Because before we have many, right? You know what I mean? Moodle is our system. But of course, I mean, I can discuss with you if you want to ask me the question why we choose Moodle, because that's a long discussion. We focus on students' learning experience in particular. We look at the quality of learning as a center. Here I want to give you some idea about another thing. I collect a number of cases from 10 faculties, started from year 2005 to 2010. Across all 10 years, I collect various cases using technology at the University of Hong Kong. So published in various papers. So I select 15 cases from 10 faculties. I don't want to read them because this is more like a bottom up. We look at what they are happening, what they're using, right? So then I try to look at that. In particular, I want to point out the case selection criteria. We want to look at cases or courses of pedagogical practice in which ICT played a substantial role. Because in some cases, you know that in a traditional university, they don't use ICT anyway. you know that, right? But then I'll try to look at that. And then secondly, evidence of a high level of student participation in blended learning. And then the third one is different learning outcomes exhibit. We are not just, why you use it, we look at learning outcome. Because without learning outcome, I don't think this is a good story, right? It's not convincing. For each case, I collect this data, document about the faculty, about the course, curriculum material, lesson observation. We provide all this, survey to student, interview teachers, and all this kind of thing to develop one case. Okay. So here are the cases. We have one from architecture. So this is the 10 faculty. So that we have more in arts because they are very diverse in some way. Business and economics, and this. Okay. Because of time, I just want to skip a little bit. Now, when I look at all these cases, I don't want to look at the process of how we analyze all this data. But then, in analyzing the data, we find there are 5 particular strategies when they use ICT or technology in their courses. Number 1, teacher facilitation is very important. Most of them, they mention about that. Student self-learning, this is another concept. Online resource, course management or administration, they very focus on how to manage it, right? And then online communication. If I look at that, I use a kind of clustering analysis, do some kind of cluster, because it's small, but I try to look at, see whether we can group it, right? I try to group it and then I find 4 patterns, 4 practices. So here are they. The first cluster, I think, very much focused on student self-learning online resource. I call it providing online resources. The second, I call it focusing on online discussion, because they very much focus on teacher facilitation, online communication. The third practice I call enhancing course management and delivery, because they usually use a very strong course management system, online communication. And then the fourth one, I label it as supporting specific pedagogy, because in that kind of practices, they use PBL, you use different kinds of specific pedagogy and supported by technology, right? Now, because of time, I will skip some of those because I wanted. Now, this is from the practice A. We got asked faculty these cases, and then here's some discussion. I skip it because here is some students' comment. Basically, the students find it's very helpful. And then they think this is like a first step towards learning. I mean, they find this is a second practice. So here's some different cases. The major challenge in this case is that some students find that they want to go to that kind of online discussion to ask questions, but the problem is they find some professors do not respond. So that is a very important challenge. Not all professors they are keen to engage in that kind of discussion. And the other challenge for that is whether you assess me or not. When I go to the discussion room or forum, and I write a lot of things, how to assess me? So this is one thing that they posed by the student, because this is a very big problem, let me tell you. The mood student got that kind of problem. I will talk about this later. Skip that. This is the C, enhancing course management. This is from the architecture faculty. They use a lot because it's an engineering course. And then I skip that. But one of the things that the student they find, if you just let them work at home with the flipped one, but then they find that they're very distracted. The distraction is one of the concerns. I mean, the student raised, we are often distracted by other things. Of course, you can imagine what are they, all right? Now, the final one is the, we find 2 cases, one from dentistry and the other one from medicine, because the dentistry tried to support the PBL, the problem-based learning, and then the medicine tried to support what we call the evidence-based practice. So this is usually, lots of medical schools, they use that kind of approach. And they use technology to support this 2 approach. So here's the one case about the faculty of dentistry, to how to support it. And I interviewed teachers here, some teachers and students. The major concern is that some students raise the issue is that all the resources put on the web need to be well planned. And some students raise a concern because some teacher or professor put something on the web. And then later on, they reiterate and discuss in the classroom, right? Now, if you do not have some kind of engagement on the online, so then you find this is useful. But some students, if they engage a lot in the online study, Then they find all of a sudden that when they attend class, then they find they repeat the discussion, and then they find it very annoying. The student find, why do I come here? Or they will ask the second question, why do I study that kind of online course? Online material at home. So that is the things that the professors need to be carefully planned. Now, because of time, I don't want to discuss this part. I just skip this because I want to discuss about the cognitive presence, the assessment, and also the presence of the community. But that is some of those things. If you compare the four, this is the four practices we find in Hong Kong. Indeed, it's very similar to this four, right? But this is later, this publication later. I published this idea in 2011. Anyway, but if you link this, the first one is very close to this one. The second one is just like this one. The third one is a communication oriented. The final one is this one. All right? But of course, if I conclude this four e-learning practices, more like a practices in transition, but I will say this is kind of ongoing. Still, we're using that. It's more like, it's very generic in some sense. Now here's some important development. We talk about our recent development. We'll talk about that. But in particular, one thing I want to talk, I want to point out now, not many educational technologies look at that. But I think this will give you another disruptive direction, the 3D printing. Of course, you can imagine, why? Let's discuss anyway. But this is, I just want to point out, this is something that I think it affects a lot, let me tell you, in terms of curriculum, in terms of curriculum content. It's very disruptive. Now, what we are doing, we're doing the similar thing. Using Moodle, looking at Moodle, looking at different things. And the university later, recently we joined the EDX in May 2014. We promised, just like the University of Auckland, we promised more than four. We promised to provide 4 Moodle courses in the coming September. Okay, from the Faculty of Medicine, Architecture, Journalism, and also Philosophy, Chinese philosophy. We asked a Western professor to talk about Chinese philosophy. That's very interesting. We also take this as more like a test water. Of course, at the same time, the university will take this as more like a social responsibility to make contribution to the academic world. So this is our understanding. The future development, we have some discussion, but I don't want to talk about the challenges, and later on, if you have it, we can ask. Okay, let's look at the last part, what disruptive. Now, when we start to talk about e-learning or using technology, we focus on flexibility, right? Because Kevin already mentioned that. We try to look at blended, just like our university, because we're a traditional one. Because you like it or not, we should have face-to-face, right? So then the blended is one thing, is our focus. Later on, we're looking at innovative practice. Because the university now, we very much focus on that, how to do something more innovative. But now we are focused on the last one, transforming learning. When you use technology, so then that should be some kind of transforming power. Make a change, make a difference. So of course we hear this is our view. We see that this will be, e-learning is not just simply a technology adoption. So that's why we see this. In a book from business researcher, a professor from Harvard Business School, The Innovator's Dilemma, he's trying to separate 2 types of innovation or technology. One we call it sustaining technologies, and another one called disruptive technology. I don't want to repeat it because these two concepts are very important concepts. But if we look at the e-learning, I would say e-learning could be a highly disruptive technology for higher education. But then the second part of the statement is more important. If we allow it to be. Because we find there's lots of things, there's no disruption, no change, no transformation, because we do not allow it to be. What does it mean, disruption? In the mid-90s, a lot of literature focused on higher education, teaching and learning. They already started the different dimensions. For example, the disruption will be changing teacher from a role as a presenter to a change agent. All right? So sometimes they call facilitator, and then they're now changing agent. But this is started from mid-90s, a lot of literature. And students from a more passive way to a more active participants. So that is the kind of changing. So the other way to look at disruption or innovation is from one of my books with my colleagues, Education Innovation Beyond Technology. So we point out, we use a kind of ecological approach to look at the changes. We find the changes will be in terms of learning objective, teachers' role, students' role, ICT use and connectedness, and also the learning outcomes. So then they can have a whole range of change from here to there. All right? For example, teacher's role, you just focus on explaining something to facilitate, and that kind of thing. I have no time, so I just stopped it here. And another way to look at disruption, I would say, if you can challenge and disrupt and have some kind of disruptive power over something is very, very stable, that is very important disruption. So here I point out 4 things. What we call educational technology foundations. There are 6 foundations. First one, communication. We change it, right? Of course, you can imagine change the communication of teacher, student, teacher, a lot of things. Interaction. Environment, I will talk about this later. You can change your environment. Just change it. For example, you're sitting here to teach, just like that one. This is a design of 200 years ago. Lecture theater, right? More than that. But then how to design another thing, change your environment. I mean, your case is kind of change your environment, right? So, culture, change the culture. Instruction and learning. So this is from the ETR&D, Education Technology Research and Development Journal. They publish a paper. The 3 editors, here's the 3 editors. They published a paper recently, talk about this. These are all well-articulated areas, all right? So, according to that, we find there's similar change, matching it at the University of Hong Kong. The first thing I just want to, when we start the new campus, we're looking at the redesign of the learning space. So, we ask the question, how students learn? What do they need? Of course, I mean professors, the first will answer, well, they need us. Of course, right? What do they need? What kind of environment they need? So that is our question, right? So then we look at, for example, first of all, look at library. So 200 many years ago, or 300, I mean, library looked like this. Put all the books, right? Even though you use a kind of shelf, it's a kind of electrical shelf. You press a button, right? But still just like that, right? But we think about library in another way. Do they need some kind of environment to work together, to have a kind of common place? Now, the commons, this terminology came from architecture. Because now you imagine There is one, if within a community, if you want to build a community, you have one house, another house, right? You need some common area, right? You cannot just build all, apartment houses just like that. When they design a building, if they really want to build a community, they need to provide what we call the commons, all right? At the university, learning is still the same thing. If you want our students to develop a learning community, you need to give them commons. So this is the commons. Because of time, I just skip it. We have what called the learning commons. For example, the whole building, we have a whole building just like this. We provide all this different advanced technology to students. They can work there. We have rooms, open area, whatever they want. They can book a small room, 3 or 4 students. But then the whole building, just like that, empty, with tables and computers. Or you can BYOD, bring your own device. The other thing is that the revamping of supporting unit. They make changes in terms of structure. In our university, we changed it. Usually we call computer center, we call ITS, IT services, right? Before they call a director of computer center, they call the director of, or CIO, right? That kind of thing. So we revamped this into, we have a kind of specific unit for e-learning pedagogical support. There is some recent development in the medicine, flip the classroom. I don't want to, because we have more discussion, we're going to flip the classroom. Conclusion, back to our theme. Yes, we asked a lot of questions in the first session because we don't have a crystal ball. Right? Do we? No? So how do we know that our students equip them, the new generation learner? I just find this as a quotation from quite old, but this is quite an inspiring quotation. The only way to predict the future is to have power to shape the future. Then the question will be, how can we have the power to shape the future? So I find there's something from the university. The university, every year we have a kind of review. This is last year's review. We're expecting the 2014 is coming. This is a kind of final remarks in one of the sessions about learning. So that remark is that education is changing. Remember, I'm going to give you a test. Remember that test? Okay, the first slide. Okay, all right. Education is changing at the local level and globally. So then you can see the university have a very clear vision. The university is committed to capitalize on these changes. So this is the thing from the university. This is a formal university review document. So this is my last conclusion. That is the thing. Remember the first slide. What did I write on the first slide? Learning. You remember that? Oh, you failed. What is that about? Yes, learning is fundamentally about change. Of course, we're going to, in teacher education, you change your student change their student. They learn something, they change their behavior. We change, the whole environment change. So I think, first of all, if you want to have that kind of shaping power, understand the changes is very important. I'm glad we have that kind of opportunity to understand change with this kind of conference. Because I think this is a very good opportunity for us to learn from each other and understand change and capitalize on them is the key. Okay, you all pass anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yuen's excellent talks. And it's already 12 past 10. Yeah, I think we should close the section. But however, I think maybe you are very eager to ask questions to Dr. Dr. Yuen. So I would like to open my question and leave others to this afternoon. Okay, please. Oh, please. The last, yeah, please.
Dr. Yuen, thank you so much. It's an insightful speech. Can I ask you one simple question? Because why learning? This could be outside the box. Why learning is actually earning plus an L in the front. Learning is earning plus an L in the front. Do we need to take, the daily practices, something like that? The second thing is, since you mentioned about in Chinese so-called 破坏式创新, but on the other hand, in business, the real business, so-called 创新式破坏. When do you think the academia, even Ivy Tower, will set the second series of actions? Thank you.
The first question is simple. I agree with you. Yes, of course, when you put some kind of slogan, a slogan is not complete. Every slogan is not complete. You can find something. So that I fully agree with you. Because if you really want to capture a comprehensive picture, you need a bigger frame, right? So I just have that kind of little thing for test, right? So that I put that. So I fully agree with you for the first question. The second one is about the disruption. Now, I fully agree with you. The disruptive idea or disruption idea is a Western idea. It's very Western. It's from a Harvard scholar. Later on he wrote another book anyway, because lots of people buy in this kind of idea, in particular business. But I agree with you, the Chinese, we have a very different culture and way to look at change and also disruption, right? So I think we need a kind of continued discussion of that. Yeah. In particular, if you talk, for example, you talk about the Chinese 这个是改变这个就是这个创新的破坏是吗？那你一个这个 no 是什么？那个原来破坏式创新是那个，但是这个 back to English 破坏式创新呢，这个是你开始的时候，这个是对的。Well, I think that is the thing that you just when you disrupt something, it's a kind of innovation. Now, when you disrupt something, of course, that is a kind of innovation because it is moving towards. Because when you change, of course, when we got as an innovation, because something is an innovation today, tomorrow would be nothing, right? It's not an innovation. So that's why the basic thing is not the label about disruption or innovation, but rather than the process is a changing process. Because it's more like a dialectic, I would use the word dialectic. It's a dialectic process. Some researcher will see innovation, disruption, innovation, disruption. So that's exactly what you see that disruption is an innovation, you know what I mean? So then the dialectic is just like that. But then the main thing is they are along the whole line of change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should close the talks this morning. Yeah, and thank you our all wonderful speakers. Let's give our wonderful speakers this morning a big applause.